What's up, everybody? Welcome to my car time. Today I'm going to be talking about genetic engineering of a human fetus. I'm going to talk a lot about all different types of genetic engineering, such as genetic engineering of crops and livestock as well, but that's so that you can understand more about genetic engineering. The main controversy really comes down to the genetic engineering of a human fetus. So let's jump right into it with this short video.
So, what is genetic engineering? Genetic engineering is when the genetic code of an organism is altered to produce a desired trait. This is done by taking a gene from one and inserting it into the DNA of another to get the wanted end result. To get a better sense of how this is done, let's first understand how DNA works. In any living thing, the DNA acts as the instruction manual for the body. Certain genes code for certain proteins, which in turn make up all the different parts of the organism. Any trait that you can think of is coded by DNA. Now, once you know what codes for what, you can use genetic engineering to essentially edit the parts you want, to some extent. All living things use the same genetic code, DNA, made from the same 4 bases, so scientists can use special enzymes to cut parts of the DNA from one living thing and sort of sew them onto the DNA of the target. The result is then a living thing that has a new gene and a new feature as a result of that gene. Now, there are many examples where genetic engineering is used today, but we're going to focus on a very specific medical example to understand this concept better. Humulin, a medication used for diabetics, is created with genetically modified bacteria. Humulin can be given to diabetic patients who lack the insulin they need. Now, how they do this is scientists figured out which section of our DNA codes for insulin, and they also found certain enzymes that can cut that gene out. What they do is, using enzymes and heat, they isolate specific gene and then insert it into the DNA of bacteria. The result is now a bacteria that produces human insulin. And since bacteria can multiply really fast, you can create a lot of insulin in a very short amount of time. Now, this is great! Genetic engineering poses huge potential in the field of science, providing us with new insight on how our genes work. However, there's also a lot of controversy in certain respects to genetic modification, specifically genetically modifying our food. To learn more about GMO foods, check out our next video.
So I thought that was a good video to show because it basically explained genetic engineering like really simply. It was like a crash course video. But yeah, it went over a bunch of the key terms that I'm going to be going over. Again, I'm going to talk about some more here, but it's important to know these because I'm going to keep bringing them up throughout the presentation. So it'll help you understand more if you can grasp these few things that she was talking about and now that I'm going to talk about here. So the first thing we're going to look at is just a broad definition of genetic engineering, which also is commonly referred to as genetic modification. And like she said, it's when you take DNA from another organism and put it into another organism, hoping to get your desired traits from it. Basically, when we're talking about genetic engineering of a human fetus, we're talking about designing your baby, designer babies or boutique babies. So that's what you gotta understand about that. And genome also comes up a lot. Like you've heard the Human Genome Project or an organism's genome. Basically, what that is just all of an organism's traits, like as a whole. That's what a genome is. And then again, you break that down into genes, which we all know what that is, your unit of heredity. So it's your eye color, your hair color, whatever. Those are all different genes that you have. And this will probably be a new one for most people. CRISPR, which is short for clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. So it's basically just a specific type of strand of DNA that is used in this genetic modification, genetic engineering, in order to modify and cut and stuff So we'll check it out on the next slide, different ways to actually go about genetic engineering. So now we're at the methods of genetic engineering. We talked about what genetic engineering of a human is, and I talked a little bit about CRISPR, which is both a type of DNA and a technique, the CRISPR technique, which is the most common method, and it involves using the Cas9 protein, which is right below it. Now what that is think of it as scissors. So you're using the Cas9, the scissors, to cut open the CRISPR DNA. Then you can manually put in the different types of traits that you want, the genes that you want, using the CRISPR technique, which uses the Cas9. So that's why they're both right there, easy for you to see. And I put vitro fertilization here as well. Now what that is you might have heard of it. Parents who are infertile use this, or if you're having trouble conceiving, or if there's problems, birth defects, you remove the egg and get a sperm sample, and you inject the sperm into the egg and then put it back into the uterus. That's a form of genetic engineering, gene editing, that's considered part of it. So let's get into some examples of genetic engineering, starting with crops, because in order to understand human genetic engineering, we have to understand it at a smaller level. So the first example is the European corn borer and western corn rootworm, which is just a long unnecessary name for a type of corn. Basically what they did, they just combined those two types of corns, the European corn borer, western corn rootworm. They're two different types of corns, put them together into one type of corn. And what that corn was, it was resistant to 80% of insects, so therefore didn't require as much pesticides. So that was a big step in GMO crops, which led to other experiments, and now basically 90% of the food that we eat is GMO. Another example, good one, is Ugandan bananas, which in Uganda, bananas were very susceptible to getting a specific type of disease which would cause them to rot, and they were unedible and poisonous actually. But they were able to make these resistant by injecting a specific type of bacteria into the DNA of the banana, just totally making it immune to that disease, which I think is pretty cool. And another one that is also really cool is onions that don't make you cry. That one is pretty self-explanatory, but it doesn't release the whatever that makes your eyes cry. They were able to make it like that, which I thought was really cool. So now that we've talked about crops, we should talk about animals now, which is the next step towards humans. First, we have Dolly the sheep, which wasn't necessarily genetically engineered, but it was more cloned. They took the nucleus of an adult sheep and planted it in an embryo of a growing, like a fetus of a sheep. Then, once that sheep was born, it was an exact clone, exact genetic clone of Dolly. Or, well, Dolly was the baby, and it was an exact clone of the mother. So that was a big step in both like learning about genetic engineering, and it's made the news. It's probably one of the most popular examples that you'll ever hear about genetic engineering. Another case where we have modified an animal is silk spinning goats, which the milk that the goats produce milk, in case you didn't know that, contains spider silk. So it was a lot easier to harvest, and it was a lot easier to, I don't know, it's easier getting milk from a goat than from a spider, I guess. And so I guess they injected the spider's silk spinning DNA into the goat, and then the milk produced it. Another example, which I think is really cool, is glow-in-the-dark mice. Now this one, there's some controversy surrounding it, but that's because, alright, so what they did was they took bioluminescent jellyfish DNA and put it inside of the mice, and then therefore made them bioluminescent, and they glow in the dark. Now they still do this a lot with fish. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but there are glow-in-the-dark fish that they sell for as pets, and people don't like that because they're like, oh, you shouldn't just create and experiment on these animals just to sell them. But that's part of the controversy we'll talk about later. So now that we've talked about animals and livestock, let's talk about humans. The first example of human genetic engineering is Adam Nash, the savior sibling, or the world's first boutique baby. His story is that his sister Molly was born with Fanconi anemia, which is like a rare bad type of anemia, and so his parents conceived him through vitro fertilization, which I talked about earlier, and that way they could alter his genes and make sure that he was free of the disease, Fanconi anemia, so that he could donate blood cord to his sister, therefore saving her life. So that was one of the first examples of us going in and altering the DNA of a baby in order to come out with traits that we wanted. I mean, in this case, it was definitely used for the better to save his sister. But again, there's always going to be controversy surrounding it, but we'll get into that later. Another example is gene doping, which if you've ever heard of blood doping, I know anatomy, we know what blood doping is, and it's basically taking genes, I guess, and injecting them into yourself. Athletes do it all the time to strengthen their immune systems or strengthen different aspects of their performance. But it's outlawed in most competitions because it's considered unethical and cheating. I agree, as it should be considered cheating. Another good example recently, Dr. He Jiankui of China created, quote, the world's first genetically engineered babies, and they are known as the CRISPR twins because he used the CRISPR method. This was the most controversial of all because he is said to not have had the licensing to practice this and to do it. Everyone's saying how unethical it is that he created babies using, a lab and everything. So he actually got arrested and was sentenced to 3 years in prison in 2019 and fined up to like $500,000. So that was a big event in the genetic engineering world. So now we can talk about the history and all the important events leading up to today. So first, we're going to look at 1973 when the first transgenic organism was created, and this was actually a mouse that was created in a lab. Basically, there wasn't as much technology as we had back then, so them just being able to help this mouse or create this mouse to not be able to get a specific type of disease, this was a very big step back then for genetic engineering and for science. Next, in 1982, we have the first synthetic drug. If you remember in the video I showed in the beginning, humulin was created using bacteria injected into the insulin, which was insulin, and it was very popular. It still is very expensive. It's usually what we use today if you have diabetes. Also in 1982, the first GMO crop appears in Chinese fields, which is Chinese tobacco that they engineered to be resistant to insects. Again, pesticides would be used less in this case, which was a plus. 1990, 8 years later, we have the Human Genome Project begins, which was scientists trying to map out every single specific gene in a human body, and that went for about 13 years. It ended in 2003 when they successfully mapped the entire human genome, and that was huge for the world of science and genetics. And then 1996, I talked about Dolly the sheep. That was happening in 1996. Now we're up to date in the 2000s, 21st century. Adam Nash is born. I talked about before. 2001, a year later, gene-targeted drug therapy. Now this is very relevant because it's used almost every day here. It's not as extreme as genetic engineering, but it is gene editing. Whether it's cancer treatments, it uses gene-targeted drug therapy a lot. Again, with the diabetes, it's very popular, and there's no controversy surrounding that since it's not as invasive and it's not altering a baby's DNA. The CRISPR technique is discovered 11 years later in 2012, and that pretty much paved the way for genetic engineering as we know it now, and which kind of led to the controversy of, is CRISPR ethical or not? And in 2015, the first human embryo is gene edited. And this is an embryo that's already growing. It doesn't have to do with Adam Nash. He was edited, but through vitro fertilization. This is a first embryo that is gone in and specifically chosen traits and basically a boutique baby. And then 2018, Dr. Janku is creates his babies, and worldwide news, and it's just mayhem. He gets arrested. But yeah, that's one of the most recent big steps in genetics and genetic engineering. So now let's really get into the controversy, and the main controversy is whether it's ethical or not. And there are lots of different arguments for both sides, but I want to see what you guys think. Jumping into it now, let's have some statistics. 40 countries have formally outlawed genetic engineering, human germline modification. Genetic engineering is in crops all around the world. It's not gonna stop. All the food we eat is pretty much GMO. Not that that's wrong, not that it's bad. Personally, I believe that with food and stuff, it's perfectly fine. It makes food taste better, last longer. But that's not the controversy we're talking about. We're talking about human germline modification, and that is outlawed in 40 countries. Here we got some political stats. I'll read it to you. 61% of Republicans, 49% independent, and 37% of Democrats oppose funding for human germline modification, which I guess that shows that, Republicans generally are against it, which is interesting to think about because most Republicans, we come from Christian backgrounds, I would like to think, and we'll talk about later if there's biblical evidence supporting not supporting genetic engineering. And number 3 would be the opposing statistics for number 2. So as I said in the last slide, 40 countries have formally banned it, and you can see them on the left picture in red with the map. So that's most of Europe, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Australia, Madagascar have all formally outlawed it, so no experiments involving human germline modification can take place. Then where it's banned with guidelines is China, where Dr. Jianku did his experiments, although he got arrested, so he obviously crossed those guidelines. Then there are restrictive rules in the United States, so we can experiment with it as long as we're within the rules. And the other countries have rules, but they're ambiguous, like Russia, but we expected that with the Russians. We never know what's going on there. If you look at the right picture, the chart, the graph, that's the results of a survey asking adults whether or not it's ethical to use genetic engineering technology in certain situations. So the first situation is preventing an incurable or fatal disease in a child, like cystic fibrosis or Huntington's, like it says right there. 71% of adults answered yes, it is right and ethical. Again, 67% said that if you can reduce the risk of diseases such as cancer, then yes, you should be able to use gene editing technology. Again, blindness and deafness or some kind of deformity, they are saying yes, let's allow that. 65% agree. Now, when we get down to altering physical appearance, this is where boutique babies, that's where the term comes from, altering the physical appearance or intelligence, athletic ability. 69% of people agree that it would be wrong to use gene editing technology in this circumstance. And 72 again believe that eye color and height are right out. So some evidence for it being not ethical. I put the map there again so we can look at it just while I'm talking. There is risk involved when it comes to experimenting on humans, as it always. Every human experiment is risky and frowned upon in most countries, in fact banned in 40 countries, like I said multiple times. And I have two quotes here that I think are important to look at. Not that these people are like well-known scientists. I mean, it's C.S. Lewis, but they're just really important to think about. Germline alteration would be performed without the consent of those most affected, namely future generations. And that really sparks interest because they are having no say in it, and whether they're getting, um, altered or not. But again, if this was someone telling me that, I would say, then how come abortion is legal? How come we can kill these babies without their consent, but we can't change their genetics without their consent? I feel like that's a lot less intense. And another quote by C.S. Lewis, great author: "If a society gains power to make descendants what it pleases, all men who live after it are patients of that power, the rule of a few hundred men over billions upon billions of men." So basically he's saying that if we as a society today get to say how tomorrow's society is going to live and be and look like, then they're just submitting to us, basically. So again, something to think about. And here's a biblical perspective. Obviously, Moses wasn't thinking about genetic engineering, but there are some instances where the Bible talks about something similar. So in Genesis 1:27, obviously God created mankind in his own image. And this is going to be an argument that somebody who opposes genetic engineering is going to use all the time, that we shouldn't change the way we are just because we're created in God's image. But a good argument for that would be, then how come we're able to operate on ourselves if we are created in God's image? God created us like that. So again, with everything on one side, there's a counterpart for the opposing side. Another Bible verse, Leviticus 19:19, basically says, "You shall not sow your fields with two kinds of seed, or wear a garment of cloth made of two kinds of material." Now, I've never heard of this. I guess back then they wanted every field to just be one type of seed, but this could also be like the GMO crops I was talking about, like with the corn, how they fused the two different types of corn. Maybe God is talking about he doesn't want us to do that. But then again, once Jesus Christ came and died on the cross for us, the old laws went out, and Leviticus is all the old laws. So then again, we kind of can't really consider this when we have our new laws and our new society and our new Jesus. And the last Bible verse, Psalm 139:13, "For you formed my inward parts, you kneaded me together in my mother's womb, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." It's a good Bible verse, but the fact that it says you formed my inward parts and created me in my mother's womb, again, goes back to the made in God's image thing with, is it right to alter how we were born, even though God is the one that had the final say on how we were born? Now let's get into, is it ethical? So this is the pro genetic engineering side. The pros for it are that it could prevent terminal illnesses from developing in a child later on in life, such as cancer, heart problems, obesity. All of this stuff could be gone. We could eradicate diseases this way. If every baby that was born, if we had performed a little operation to just get rid of the cancer gene in them, if we got to that point, then we could eradicate cancer as a race, which I think is just amazing. We could prevent illness from being developed later in life. So, Alzheimer's, we could prevent dementia, all that kind of stuff. Could prevent disabilities. So if a child is born blind, we could cure that. Born deaf, cure that. Child can't walk, we could cure that. We could have a fully functioning baby 100% of the time. And there's a possibility of enhancing the human race, whether that is in the distant future, whether that's some kind of X-Men. Like, I know that sounds like a joke, but like, if we could give ourselves enhanced capabilities, that's definitely like a possibility or something to at least consider and think about. Now my position. I am on the edge of whether it is ethical or not ethical because I understand how creating boutique babies is wrong. I agree. Boutique babies are wrong. I don't think that we should be able to choose the eye color or the hair or the height or the skin tone or whatever. I don't think we should be able to choose that. I think that that is how God made us, and you should stay like that. But when we talk about curing illnesses and stuff, I think that again, if we have the possibility to eradicate cancer, eradicate heart disease, we obviously have to explore the possibility. And I mean, it sounds bad, but if we have to have some bad experiments in order to save millions and millions of lives, I think that's worth the risk. And I put this meme there because I thought it was really funny and it goes along with my position just because I like memes. So just take a look at it real quick. So my challenge to you guys, the watcher, the listener, is why should you agree with me? Because, again, if we can eradicate cancer, why wouldn't we take that chance? And losing a couple lives to save billions of lives that die from cancer every year. Is it important to act? Honestly, there's not much that you and I can do except get a degree in genetics, go to med school, and become doctors and research this. Or unless there's something that you can do like raising awareness for it. Like that could always be done, and that's important because not a lot of people know about this, and not a lot of people have genetic engineering on their mind. But it is a really cool thing to think about, and it's really important because that seems to be where we're heading as a society, both in science and medicine, focusing a lot on genetics. So in that way, our thinking should change. We should start thinking about it more. And finally, what action is needed? I think in order for everybody to be on the same page, we need to have a guaranteed safe way of genetic engineering. Because CRISPR is not necessarily a guaranteed safe way. It's the most popular and most common way, but that's also banned in 40 countries because of the danger of it and the risk involved. So if there was a surefire way to pick and choose traits and get rid of illnesses, that I say, hey, let's go for it. But until then, I don't think everyone's going to be on the same page. So finally, I'd like to leave you with 3 questions. The first question is, do you think the risk of babies being born with birth defects as a result of genetic engineering experiments, do you think that that outweighs the possibility of preventing diseases in babies and saving millions of lives? Another question is there evidence in the Bible that goes against the genetic engineering of crops, GMO crops and livestock? Do you think that the Bible verse that I gave you, Leviticus 19:19, do you think that that is strong enough to get you to not eat GMO crops and food? And my last question is, do you think that if it is possible, hypothetically, we should be able to alter human DNA to enhance us and get X-Men, and this sounds stupid, but X-Men capabilities? Do you think that, if possible, we should be allowed to do that? And that is all that I have for you guys. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And, hit me with a like or a comment and subscribe. Thank you.